Welcome to Defund the BBC. I'm Ted Jeffrey, and joining me this week is a member of the National Assembly for Wales, as well as being a leader of the Welsh Conservative Group. I am, of course, talking about Andrew Davies. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Cheers, Ted. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, this week, Jess Brammer is being seen as the front runner to become head of BBC News. However, it's been revealed that she's posted a series of left-wing tweets criticising Boris Johnson, criticising Brexit and Britain's imperial past. Now, despite more and more stories coming out concerning her bias, it appears as though the BBC are still considering her appointment. Andrew, what do you make of this?
I think it's really important that any public service broadcaster has political neutrality at its heart. And it's really important that the executives that wield the editorial control obviously are completely impartial in the way that they use the resources that the public give them via their licence fee year. So I would hope that the executives who are making this appointment will think long and hard to make sure the integrity and the impartiality of the BBC is protected.
Now, also in relation to that, Andrew Neil has also come out and said that the BBC needs to seriously sort of reconsider, or in fact consider dropping the first B from their name, British. If it continues with this anti-British drivel that we're seeing, I mean, what do you make of the fact as well that there is a particular bias from the BBC towards separatist parties in Wales, just as we see from them in Scotland and Northern Ireland? I mean, do you think the BBC is using British taxpayers' money to campaign for the breakup of our treasured union?
Well, I think what we should be doing is making sure that those who care passionately about Britain and the United Kingdom as an entity fight to make sure that entity is portrayed positively on the airwaves. And as a unionist, I believe passionately that the Union of the United Kingdom benefits all four component parts of the United Kingdom: Northern Ireland, Wales, England and Scotland. But I do find it ironic that when I do look at BBC Wales, for example, the number of nationalists and separatists who occupy senior positions within that organisation, who are very good professionals, don't get me wrong, but ultimately go under the banner of the British Broadcasting Corporation and yet privately want to see the breakup of the Union of the United Kingdom. I do find it rather bizarre, to say the least, that they choose to take their employment and take their monthly salary from an organisation that has the word British in its banner.
So would you sort of say as well then that there's a real, as we see throughout the BBC, there's a real lack of diversity of ideas, in particular at BBC Wales, amongst the sort of chief executives and head honchos?
Well, just talking generally, I think there is a lack of centre-right thinking, certainly in BBC Wales. I speak from personal experience. I mean, we've just had a record-breaking Welsh parliamentary election back in May, where we achieved a record share of the popular vote, a record return of MSs to the Welsh Parliament. And yet the BBC, when they put up their online coverage of the election, said this is a disappointing night for the Conservatives in Wales. I was flabbergasted by that and made remonstrations with them over it. But I think it did show a deep inertia that sits at the top of the BBC in Wales, in particular, when it comes to centre-right politics.
No, absolutely. And moving on, you know, what we've also seen this week is sort of elements, as we do nearly every week here at Defund the BBC. We highlight aspects of hypocrisy that we've seen from not just BBC executives, but BBC stars. And one of those in particular is Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker and all of the Beeb's other millionaires have been speeding up and down the country for the Euros coverage, with Lineker clocking in more than 3,600 miles, despite never leaving the UK. Many of these journeys and those of fellow stars will have been funded by the licence fee payer. Also, given the fact that the BBC are always preaching about carbon emissions, what do you make of this hypocrisy that we see from BBC stars?
Well, yeah, it's all about the way the public look at the way the licence fee's been spent. And at the moment, when you look at the overall way that the money's been spent, I don't think people have confidence that the way that people are handing their money over to the BBC in a legal tax, if you like, because it is a legal obligation on you if you have a TV to own the TV license, is being used in the best way to promote the values and beliefs that this country has. And at the moment, one of the big agenda items is climate change, for example. I see that in my post bag as a politician. And so when you do get stories like this, highlighting some of maybe the contradictions of the public messaging that goes out on BBC broadcasts, but ultimately some of the more highly paid stars working contrary to what the public want to see, which is a reduction in carbon emissions. I think there's a real contradiction going on here, and especially when it's been done at licence payers' expense.
And also the BBC has come out and said this week that they'll offer white lanyards to members of staff who are anxious about returning to work so that they can signal they want extra personal space. I mean, don't you think it's funny that, Andrew, they're offering this to their staff, but they also can't offer the same courtesy to elderly members of society when they're busy harassing them on their doorsteps with a licence fee?
Well, it is about making sure that when people do come back to the workplace after such a long period of time, that people do feel confident in doing their work at their workstation, wherever that might be in the vast estate that is the BBC. But I would suggest the best way to do that is to get normality back as soon as possible, so that people feel confident that they're going back into an environment that's as normal as possible. And that's interaction with other people. That's giving people confidence to be themselves, express themselves, rather than identifying and marking out individuals who might find it difficult in a particular way. Because ultimately what you need to do is make sure that you create the confidence within that workspace so that people feel that the team around them supporting them, rather than marking them out with identity lanyards that obviously I would suggest in certain climates aren't the best way of addressing the issue that you've highlighted there, Ted.
And sort of following on from that point there, obviously the thing that I sort of mentioned about elderly members being harassed on their doorsteps by licence fee officers, would you agree that that's actually a real issue that we're seeing? Although it's great that perhaps the BBC can make sure that their workers are feeling safe, the people that they at times attempt to criminalise for not paying licence fee, their audience, they're the ones that they're doing a public disservice to by sort of going around haranguing them and pestering them to pay the licence fee.
Well, let's not forget, I mean, it is wrong that elderly people are pestered on the doorstep, full stop, because let's not forget the agreement that the government had with the BBC when this rule came in and this change came in the way licence fees were going to be collected and paid for, especially the over 75s, was because that the BBC agreed to the rule change and to take that responsibility on from the government, and the government then changed the rules to allow a bigger catch for the BBC and licence fees from people who are watching catch-up TV and using different means to watch BBC services. And yet halfway through the transition, the BBC reneged on their part of the deal and now are persecuting over 75s for the licence fee. That, to me, shakes the BBC to its core and shakes the belief that the public have that obviously that they're a trustworthy organisation able to be supported in agreements that they enter into.
Now, throughout the pandemic, the BBC have been seen as cheerleaders for lockdown. And the other day, we saw the broadcaster claim that a hospital in the northeast of England was waging war with coronavirus. But in reality, the hospital in question hadn't recorded a single COVID-related death in 76 days. I mean, Andrew, would you agree that the way that the BBC are sort of doing the public a great deal of disservice here by trying to sort of peddle falsehoods such as that?
Well, it's really important that if you're a broadcaster of any shade or colour, but in particular a public sector broadcaster, that you actually report factually correct information that is balanced and objective and allows the listener or the viewer to make an informed decision. And that should be the editorial policy of any organisation, but in particular, an organisation that relies on public subscription. And so the example you've just given to me would say that obviously a lot more work needs to be done on that aspect by the BBC if that is a genuine case. I mean, I haven't seen it myself, but I'm not saying that you're not telling me the truth there. But if it is correct, then obviously that calls into question the objectivity of the BBC and the way it gathers its news.
And obviously, you know, we've also seen issues regarding journalists at the BBC. A BBC journalist who was fired for saying Hitler was right blames her sacking on a pro-Israel conspiracy. I suppose linking back to what we've talked about, not just with BBC Wales, but the BBC as a whole, in terms of the lack of diversity of ideas. I mean, where does the BBC find these lefty lobbies to sort of bring on board as journalists? I mean, why is there such a big deficit in diversity of ideas, not just at BBC Wales, but across the BBC nationwide?
Well, I can only speak obviously of the BBC in Wales because that's what I have experience, and it is about the importance of diversity. It is importance of plurality, and above all, it's about that dynamic I talked about a public service broadcaster making sure they deliver on the aims of the public that they're serving, and that is really, really important to maintain confidence in the organisation. And it is a fact that increasingly, as we've seen in numbers recently, more and more people are turning off the ability to pay their license fee because they're not using BBC services. And that is a real question mark over how the BBC going forward will be able to continue to fund in a meaningful way. And that's why I think there needs to be a bigger debate over public service broadcasting here in the United Kingdom and importantly here in Wales, because there is a role for public service broadcasting, but is it on a model that is 70, 80, 90 years old, or do we move to the era of multimedia platforms, which everyone now has the ability to access in all parts of the United Kingdom?
No, absolutely. Well, Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for speaking to Defund the BBC today.